On April 26, 2013, 26-year-old Jessica Lynn Haringa reported for her evening shift at the Exxon gas station in Norton Shores, Michigan. She was a young mother raising a 3-year-old boy while supporting her household at a time when her boyfriend was unemployed. At 4:35 p.m., she clocked in, beginning what seemed to be a normal Friday evening at the station. The hours passed without incident, and customers were served as usual. Nothing appeared unusual until just after 11 o'clock that night, when a man arrived at the pumps and noticed the station was empty. Jessica's vehicle was still parked outside. Inside, her belongings remained untouched. Her purse, containing more than $400, was sitting on the counter. Her keys and jacket were also left behind. Even the register drawer still contained money. The absence of theft or disturbance suggested she had not walked away voluntarily. Something more concerning had taken place. Investigators soon discovered small but troubling traces of evidence. Faint drops of blood were located on the floor inside. Near the blood, officers recovered a small piece of plastic later identified as the battery cover of a Walther P22 pistol laser sight, along with 2 watch batteries. The door leading toward that area could only be opened from the inside, reinforcing suspicions that Jessica had been forcibly removed rather than choosing to leave. Later that night, an important eyewitness account emerged. The station manager and her husband recalled a silver minivan entering through the back service drive with its headlights off. They observed the vehicle parked behind the station. At the rear, a man appeared to be opening and closing the hatch as though adjusting something inside before slamming it shut and driving west along the service road. The manager remembered the driver wearing a red or orange sweatshirt. Her husband described the van as a silver Chrysler Town & Country and noted the driver's messy, wavy hair. Earlier, a friend had stopped by around 8:50 p.m. without noticing anything unusual, and the final customer had seen nothing amiss. Yet the evidence, the belongings left behind, the blood, and the van's movements, convinced investigators this was not a robbery. It was abduction. Following Jessica Haringa's disappearance, investigators immediately canvassed the surrounding area for witnesses and physical evidence. Detectives examined nearby businesses and homes for surveillance footage. One grainy camera provided a small but significant clue. A Chrysler Town & Country minivan was captured near the area around the time Jessica vanished. Although the image lacked clarity, it matched the description already given by the station manager and her husband, who had observed a silver van parked behind the Exxon with its headlights turned off. Investigators also uncovered another disturbing detail during interviews. A woman who had visited the Exxon station the day before Jessica disappeared recalled an unusual encounter. While she was speaking with Jessica, a man approached and inserted himself into the conversation. He told her that Jessica was not really alone and insisted that her customers would protect her. The remark was unsettling at the time, but significance became clearer after Jessica vanished. This woman was later able to provide enough detail for authorities to create a composite sketch of the man she encountered. The sketch offered investigators a starting point, but no immediate identification. Despite these leads, the investigation faced significant hurdles. Chrysler Town & Country vans were extremely common in Michigan, with more than 15,000 registered in the state. Approximately 5,000 of them were silver, making it difficult to narrow the search. Investigators also examined the forensic evidence collected from the Exxon scene. The small plastic piece later identified as the battery cover for a Walther P22 pistol laser sight, along with the watch batteries, pointed toward firearms involvement. Yet these items offered no direct link to a specific suspect. As weeks passed, the lack of progress frustrated investigators and devastated Jessica's family. The eyewitness accounts, vehicle sightings, and forensic traces collectively suggested a targeted abduction rather than a random disappearance. Still, without a solid suspect, the investigation stalled, leaving critical questions unanswered and the case unresolved. In the weeks following Jessica Haringa's disappearance, the Norton Shores community rallied in support of her family. Vigils were held, flyers were distributed, and local residents remained determined to keep her name and face visible. Volunteers worked alongside relatives to cover neighborhoods with posters, while social media became another tool to spread her photograph. For Jessica's family, maintaining public awareness was essential. They wanted constant reminders that she was missing and needed to be found. At the same time, police continued to investigate every possible lead. Tips were pursued, and a composite sketch based on the account from the woman who encountered a suspicious man at the station was widely circulated. The description of a silver Chrysler Town and Country van was repeated across news reports. Detectives examined potential suspects and tried to match vehicles, but progress remained slow. Despite the purse, the blood evidence, the plastic battery cover, and the eyewitness accounts, no direct suspect emerged. As the months went on, the trail grew colder. Surveillance footage was too grainy to provide clarity. The sheer number of similar vans across Michigan made it impossible to narrow the search. Without stronger evidence or definitive witness, the investigation stalled. Eventually, the case shifted from active pursuit to inactive status. For Jessica's loved ones, this development was devastating. They had never accepted the idea that she had simply vanished. They continued to hold vigils, organize events, and speak to the media. They believed she was still alive and hoped for a future break. The transition from active search to cold case left them waiting in grief, unwilling to let her memory fade. On June 29, 2014, 36-year-old Rebecca Sue Bletch left her home in Dalton Township, Michigan, for an evening jog. The route was familiar, and the outing was part of her routine. When she did not return home, neighbors grew concerned. Shortly after, her body was discovered lying in the middle of a road. The first calls to emergency services described what appeared to be a tragic accident. To those who first saw her, the scene looked like she had been struck by a vehicle. However, investigators quickly realized the circumstances told a different story. Forensic examination revealed that Rebecca had been shot 3 times in the back of the head at close range. This discovery changed the case instantly from a suspected accident to a confirmed homicide. Her body showed additional injuries. Bruises were found on her wrists, hands, back, and legs, suggesting that she'd been assaulted before her death. The violence of the attack indicated more than a random encounter. At the scene, investigators recovered 3 spent shell casings. Ballistics confirmed they came from a .222 caliber firearm. This physical evidence became one of the most significant details in the case. Still, with no immediate suspects or eyewitnesses, detectives faced an uphill battle. There were no clear signs of robbery, no witnesses to the attack, and no immediate explanation for why Rebecca had been targeted. As the investigation unfolded, authorities considered the possibility that her killing was random, yet its brutality, combined with its proximity in both time and location to the disappearance of Jessica Haringa, raised further concerns. Detectives began to quietly explore whether the 2 crimes could be linked. At this stage, however, the case remained unsolved, and Rebecca's family was left without answers. The recovered shell casings, though, would later prove crucial. In April 2016, a 16-year-old girl's quick decision changed the course of several investigations. That night, she had left a party and found herself walking alone. She had no phone and was unfamiliar with the area. As she tried to make her way home, a silver minivan slowed beside her. The driver offered assistance. Initially cautious, she asked to borrow his phone. He seemed agreeable, and she stepped into the van to make a call. Almost immediately, the situation turned. Instead of waiting, the driver accelerated, trapping her inside. He then produced a handgun and pointed it at her. In that terrifying moment, she realized she was being abducted. Acting instinctively, she made a desperate choice. She threw herself out of the moving vehicle, barefoot and injured but determined to escape. Despite her injuries, she managed to run and call for help. Her decision to jump likely saved her life. The teenager's account gave investigators a new opportunity. She described the driver as a white male in his 40s with messy dark hair. Based on her description, a composite sketch was quickly created. Police then began comparing her account with vehicle registrations. The van she described was a silver Chrysler Town and Country, matching the same make and model connected to the Exxon station on the night Jessica Haringa disappeared. When shown photographs, the teenager immediately identified Jeffrey Willis as the man who had abducted her. Willis was a registered owner of a silver Chrysler Town and Country. This was the first time investigators had a concrete suspect, not only for the attempted abduction, but also for the earlier cases. Her survival and identification provided the critical link. For the first time, multiple unsolved cases converged on a single name. Once Jeffrey Willis was identified as a suspect in the teenager's escape, investigators secured warrants to search both his home and his vehicle. What they uncovered would connect him not only to the attempted abduction, but also to two of the most troubling unsolved cases in Muskegon County. Inside Willis's silver Chrysler Town and Country van, police discovered a disturbing collection of items. Among them were syringes filled with insulin, which could be used to incapacitate someone. They also found handcuffs, rope, a ball gag, and pills. This so-called kit suggested preparation for control and restraint. Each object carried unsettling implications, reinforcing the idea that the teenager's abduction was not an isolated act. The most significant discovery inside the van was a firearm. It was a .222 caliber handgun, and ballistics testing later confirmed it matched the bullets recovered from the scene where Rebecca Sue Bletch had been murdered. Investigators noted the gun's serial number had been deliberately scratched off, and its laser sight was missing a battery cover. This detail stood out. The small plastic battery cover left behind at the Exxon station during Jessica Horinga's disappearance matched the missing piece from this very weapon. The connection between the two cases was no longer theoretical. The search extended to Willis's computer, where digital evidence provided further links. Investigators discovered a folder labeled VIX. Inside were subfolders with initials JLH and RSB, corresponding to Jessica Lynn Horinga and Rebecca Sue Bletch. These files suggested deliberate organization of material related to the two women. Even more chilling was a password-protected file. Its code was J4L27H13, directly referencing Jessica's initials and the exact date she went missing. This file demonstrated planning and obsession, leaving little doubt about Willis's involvement. The combination of physical and digital evidence tied the cases together in ways investigators had struggled to establish for years. The weapon matched the homicide. The missing battery cover matched the Exxon scene. The digital folders pointed directly to the victims. Collectively, these discoveries formed the backbone of the prosecution's case against Jeffrey Willis. What began with a teenager's desperate escape now provided authorities with tangible proof that linked Willis to the disappearance of Jessica Horinga and the murder of Rebecca Sue Bletch. As investigators built their case against Jeffrey Willis, attention also turned toward his cousin, Kevin Blum. Blum worked as a Michigan prison guard and soon became entangled in the investigation through his own statements. During questioning, Blum initially made a shocking claim. He told investigators that Willis had once summoned him and revealed Jessica Horinga. According to Blum's first account, she was unconscious, injured, and wrapped in a sheet. This disturbing statement suggested direct knowledge of Jessica's fate. However, Blum's cooperation did not remain consistent. He later retracted portions of his story, creating confusion for investigators. His withdrawal of critical details weakened the credibility of his initial claim and complicated the process of confirming what had happened. Prosecutors eventually charged Blum with lying to police. He pleaded guilty, and the court sentenced him to time served for that offense. Despite this retraction, Blum's involvement in the case was not finished. Under continued scrutiny and further investigation, he later admitted to playing a more direct role. Blum acknowledged that he had helped Willis dispose of Jessica's remains. This confession shifted his position from being a potential witness to being criminally implicated as an accessory after the fact. For his role, Blum was convicted and received a sentence of probation. He was also ordered to wear a GPS ankle monitor. His evolving testimony, from an initial shocking statement to retraction and later admission, complicated the investigation but ultimately provided corroboration that supported prosecutors in connecting Willis to Jessica's disappearance. In 2018, Jeffrey Willis stood trial for two of Muskegon County's most haunting cases: the disappearance of Jessica Horinga and the murder of Rebecca Sue Bletch. Although Jessica's body had never been recovered, prosecutors relied on a combination of circumstantial and forensic evidence to build their case. They pointed to Willis's repeated visits to the Exxon station in the weeks before Jessica vanished, suggesting he had been watching her. Records confirmed he was absent from work the night she disappeared, and phone data placed him near his grandfather's home, just minutes from the gas station, around 11 o'clock. For Rebecca's case, ballistics provided the strongest link. The .222 caliber handgun recovered from Willis's van matched the shell casings left at the scene of her murder. Alongside this, prosecutors emphasized the disturbing items found in the van: syringes filled with insulin, restraints, rope, and a ball gag. These, combined with the files discovered on his computer, including the folder labeled with Jessica's and Rebecca's initials, painted a picture of deliberate planning and predatory behavior. The defense argued the case was built on assumptions. They claimed the surveillance footage from the Exxon was too grainy to identify Willis or his vehicle, and they pressed the absence of Jessica's body as a gap in prosecution's evidence. Despite these arguments, the jury reached a decision quickly. After only 90 minutes of deliberation, Willis was found guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In court, Willis showed no remorse. He mocked the families, turned away as they spoke, and at one point blew them a kiss. For Jessica's relatives, the verdict brought some measure of accountability, but not closure. Her body has never been found, and her family continues to hope for answers. Even after conviction, they believe the case remains unfinished. Just after midnight in Midburgh, Florida, a call reached the Clay County 911 center. On the line was a 14-year-old boy, Trevor Lee. His voice was calm, almost unnervingly polite, unlike what operators typically hear in emergencies. He identified himself, explained that he had walked to the Cross Point Church, and stated that he was waiting there for deputies to arrive. What unsettled the dispatcher was not panic or fear, but the strangely measured details he offered. He said he had emptied his pockets, discarded his backpack along the road, and was standing outside beneath the large cross. He insisted that he had nothing on him, and that he was waiting to be taken into custody. The dispatcher tried to understand what was happening. At first, the tone of the call left room for doubt, raising concerns that it could be a prank or even a dangerous ambush. But as Trevor continued speaking, his words revealed something darker. In a steady voice, he asked if the dispatcher could pray with him. When pressed further, he admitted that he had just killed his parents, David Lee and Brandy Smith, and that their bodies were still inside their home. The confession, paired with his request for prayer, created a surreal exchange that would later be replayed as one of the most disturbing pieces of evidence in the case. As the call unfolded, deputies rushed to both the church and the Lee residence. Sheriff Michelle Cook later explained that her team initially feared the call might be another swatting incident, as the county had faced several in recent months. The possibility that someone was attempting to lure law enforcement into danger crossed their minds. Yet, once entry was made into the Lee home, those doubts were erased. Both David and Brandy were found in bed, each shot multiple times. The firearm used in the killings had come from inside the residence. Meanwhile, at the church, Trevor stood quietly as patrol units converged on the parking lot. He offered no resistance, showed no visible fear, and surrendered without incident. The calmness that marked his 911 call remained as handcuffs were placed on his wrists. It was the first step in an investigation that would leave an entire community searching for answers. Hours before the shootings, the Lee family appeared to be living through an ordinary, even joyful day. Trevor Lee, just 14 years old, was not isolated in his room, nor was he grounded or sulking. Instead, he was with his parents, David Lee and Brandy Smith, enjoying a family outing that seemed free of tension. They went to movies together, shared food afterward, and spent the evening laughing. For those who later pieced together the timeline, this sequence of normal activities made what happened next all the more incomprehensible. Friends of the family, when interviewed, described the Lees as devoted parents who rarely gave outsiders any reason to suspect trouble within the household. Trevor's best friend, Curry, told reporters that the Lees were one of the best families he had ever known. They treated him like a son, welcomed him into their home, and offered him the kind of support that made their bond with Trevor seem strong and stable. According to Curry, the Lees provided both love and guidance, becoming a second family to him as well. Trevor's sister, who was stationed with the military in California, also struggled to make sense of what unfolded. Speaking to the media after the tragedy, she described her shock at learning that her parents were suddenly gone and her younger brother was accused of taking their lives. She reflected on how ordinary the day had sounded when she last spoke with them, adding to the disbelief that the same household would become a crime scene only hours later. From the outside, the Lees embody what many considered a healthy family dynamic. Trevor played football, his parents supported his activities, and they were active participants in his life. There were no signs, at least publicly, that the evening held any conflict or tension. Yet before dawn, David and Brandy were dead, each killed as they slept, while Trevor became the central figure in one of the most disturbing cases a community had ever faced. The contrast between the seemingly perfect day and the horrific night underscores the central mystery. How could a routine evening filled with laughter end in tragedy only a few hours later? Although the day had seemed ordinary, investigators later confirmed an argument took place between Trevor Lee and his parents sometime that evening. The exact subject of the dispute has not been disclosed, but it was described by Sheriff Michelle Cook as significant enough to leave an impact on the 14-year-old. What made this detail crucial was the timing. The argument did not immediately result in violence. Instead, Trevor had several hours to think about what had been said, leaving authorities to conclude that his actions later that night were not spontaneous but calculated. According to Sheriff Cook, this cooling-off period ruled out the idea of an uncontrollable outburst. Instead, the timeline suggested premeditation. Investigators believe that Trevor remained in the home following the conflict, silently processing his emotions before making a decision that would alter his family's life forever. In that period of reflection, he accessed Brandy Smith's firearm. The weapon was not secured, and Trevor already knew where it was kept. Detectives pointed to this moment as critical, showing that the shooting was not a reaction made in anger, but a deliberate step taken after consideration. When deputies later examined the scene, they found no evidence of a struggle. The house showed no broken furniture, no overturned objects, and no attempts by the victims to defend themselves. David Lee and Brandy Smith were discovered in their bed, each with multiple gunshot wounds, confirming they'd been asleep at the time of the attack. This reinforced the belief that Trevor carried out the act while his parents were vulnerable, offering them no chance to respond or seek help. For investigators, these details painted a picture of chilling decision-making. The hours between the argument and the murder suggested that Trevor weighed his options and made a deliberate choice. Prosecutors later emphasized this point, arguing that retrieving the firearm and entering his parents' bedroom indicated preparation rather than momentary rage. The absence of resistance only deepened the unsettling conclusion. The killings were executed without warning and with intent. In the aftermath of the shootings, Trevor Lee did not immediately reach for 911. Instead, his first call was directed to his sister, who was stationed in California with the military, thousands of miles away. She had no idea that her younger brother was reaching out from a home that had already become a crime scene. The content of that conversation has not been released, but investigators acknowledge that it may be central to understanding Trevor's state of mind, his motive, and the sequence of events that followed. What is known is that once the call ended, his sister immediately contacted authorities in California, pleading with them to send help to her family's residence in Florida. The desperation in her voice underscored both the distance and the helplessness that she felt, knowing something irreversible had already occurred. After contacting his sister, Trevor placed a call that would soon be played across national media outlets. Standing outside Cross Point Church, beneath its large cross, he dialed 911 and calmly identified himself. The dispatcher was immediately struck by the lack of panic in his tone. Trevor explained that he had discarded his backpack, emptied his pockets, and was waiting to be arrested. Then, in a quiet voice, he asked if the dispatcher would pray with him. During the exchange, he confessed that he had killed his parents and that their bodies were still inside their bedroom. It was an interaction that felt surreal to all who later heard it, blending an unsettling composure with a horrific admission. The timeline also included a third phone call, made earlier that evening to his best friend, Curry. In that call, Trevor told his friend that he loved him and wished him good night. At the time, Curry thought little of it, assuming it was simply another sign of their close bond. Only later did he realize that those words carried a finality that he could not have anticipated. For investigators, these calls established both a timeline and a portrait of Trevor's mindset. He appeared calm, reflective, and seemingly resigned to the consequences of his actions. Yet the secrecy surrounding his sister's call continues to raise critical questions. When deputies entered the Lee residence, they were met with a silence that contrasted sharply with the violence that had unfolded inside. There were no signs of a fight, no broken furniture, and no evidence of a struggle. Instead, the home appeared undisturbed, as though the evening had passed normally. The only disruption was found in the bedroom, where David Lee and Brandy Smith lay motionless in their bed. Both had been shot multiple times while they slept, offering them no opportunity to defend themselves or call for help. The scene suggests a deliberate attack carried out while the victims were at their most vulnerable. Investigators quickly determined that the firearm used in the killings belonged to Brandy. It had not been stored in a safe, nor was it locked away, making it accessible within the home. Trevor, already familiar with its location, had retrieved it before entering his parents' bedroom. The discovery raised immediate concerns about gun storage practices, especially given the outcome. While Florida law does not mandate the securing of firearms in the presence of minors, the accessibility of the weapon became an unsettling detail in the broader picture of the case. Beyond the crime scene itself, investigators began reviewing the family's history with law enforcement. Clay County Sheriff's Office records revealed 5 previous calls to the Lee residence since 2021. These included reports of disturbances, one incident involving a self-harm threat, and another categorized as a sick person. A more recent call, logged only months before the killings, was listed vaguely as a follow-up investigation. None of these earlier reports appeared to predict the scale of violence that would later occur, but together they hinted at ongoing tension within the household. Friends and family members, however, maintained that David and Brandy were caring parents who supported Trevor and his activities. They rejected the notion that the household environment was unstable. Still, the records left investigators with questions about what might have been happening privately behind closed doors. The calm surface of the family's outward appearance did not erase the documented history of previous disturbances. For detectives, the combination of an undisturbed home, an unsecured firearm, and prior police calls formed a troubling foundation for understanding the events of that night. The murders of David Lee and Brandy Smith sent shockwaves through the Midburgh community. News of their deaths and the revelation that their 14-year-old son Trevor was accused of the crime left friends, neighbors, and relatives struggling to comprehend what had happened. To many who knew him, Trevor was a well-liked teenager who showed no outward signs of anger or resentment toward his parents. The sudden transformation from perfect son to confessed killer was almost impossible for them to reconcile. Trevor's best friend, Kari, became one of the most outspoken voices following the tragedy. Despite acknowledging the reality of the crime, he insisted that Trevor should not be defined solely by his actions that night. He described his friend as someone who had always been caring, supportive, and loyal. "He is not a bad person," Kari said, pointing to the many times the Lees had welcomed him into their home and treated him as family. The statement reflected both loyalty and disbelief, as he tried to separate the Trevor he knew from the one who stood accused. Among classmates and teammates, the response was equally heavy. Trevor had been active in local football, with his parents often seen cheering him on from the sidelines. Students who trained and played alongside him expressed devastation at the news, recalling the support he received from David and Brandy at every game and practice. For them, the family had seemed like a model of encouragement and stability, making the violent end difficult to comprehend. Relatives also voiced their confusion and sorrow. Brandy's cousin, when approached by the media, emphasized that David and Brandy were good parents who had raised Trevor with care. His brief remarks underscored the disbelief felt across the family, highlighting how no one close to them could explain what had led to such violence. For Midburgh as a whole, the case became more than just a legal matter. It shattered a sense of trust and safety within the community, leaving residents to grapple with the unsettling truth that even the most admired families can harbor unseen fractures. The emotional fallout was widespread, extending far beyond the immediate family to everyone who had once looked at the Lees as an example of devotion and love. As investigators pieced together the details of the case, prosecutors faced a critical decision about how Trevor Lee should be tried in court. At just 14 years old, he had already been charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder for the deaths of his parents, David Lee and Brandy Smith. Yet the severity of the crime raised immediate questions about whether juvenile charges would be sufficient or whether the case should be moved into adult court. If Trevor were prosecuted solely within the juvenile justice system, the consequences would be limited. Under Florida law, jurisdiction in such cases generally ends when the individual reaches the age of 19. This would mean that Trevor, convicted of killing both of his parents, could potentially walk free in just a few years. For many in the Midburg community, that possibility was unthinkable. Residents who had been shaken by the brutality of the crime expressed that releasing him before adulthood would fail to deliver justice for David and Brandy. The alternative was to charge Trevor as an adult, a step Florida prosecutors have taken in other high-profile cases. In that scenario, the sentencing could be dramatically harsher. Though the death penalty cannot be applied to minors under Supreme Court rulings, a life sentence would be possible. This would ensure that Trevor remained behind bars for decades, potentially the remainder of his life, depending on judicial outcomes. Legal experts pointed to this choice as more than a procedural question. It became a debate over Trevor's mindset and intent. Was the crime a result of teenage impulsivity spiraling into tragedy, or did his decision to retrieve a firearm wait several hours after an argument? An attack while his parents slept demonstrate a deeper and more dangerous level of calculation? These considerations would influence how the state framed the charges. Sheriff Michelle Cook publicly described Trevor as cooperative during questioning, noting that he was willing to explain his actions in detail. Yet cooperation could not erase the severity of the offense or the loss of 2 lives. For prosecutors, the decision stood as a defining moment, whether to treat Trevor as a troubled minor or as a criminal whose actions warranted the full weight of the adult justice system. Even with the investigation underway and Trevor Lee in custody, significant questions remain unanswered. Central among them is the phone call he placed to his sister in California immediately after the murders. Investigators have confirmed its existence, but have withheld its contents from the public. The secrecy surrounding what was said leaves open speculation about motive, state of mind, and whether his sister urged him to seek help. Until those details are revealed, it remains a critical missing piece in understanding the full scope of the case. Another unresolved element is the argument that occurred earlier in the evening. Authorities have acknowledged it as the spark that preceded the killings, yet no explanation has been offered about what the conflict involved. The absence of detail has left both investigators and the public questioning whether the dispute was minor and escalated unexpectedly, or whether it reflected deeper issues within the household that were hidden from outsiders. Without clarity, the argument lingers as a turning point cloaked in uncertainty. There are also broader considerations regarding Trevor's mental health. Past calls to the family home included reports connected to self-harm, raising questions about whether untreated struggles may have contributed to his actions. Still, no definitive evidence has been presented linking those past incidents directly to the murders. This leaves open the possibility that what occurred may never be fully explained by psychological evaluations or clinical terms, but instead represents an act of violence without clear reasoning. To neighbors, relatives, and friends, the Lees appear to embody a loving and supportive family. David and Brandy attended their son's football practices, welcomed his friends into their home, and were described by relatives as good parents. Yet behind that outward image, something fractured enough to end in tragedy. Reconciling these two versions of the family, one admired publicly and one broken privately, remains one of the most painful challenges for the community. As Trevor's legal proceedings continue, his future lies in the hands of prosecutors and the courts. Regardless of the outcome, the emotional toll will endure for everyone connected to the case. The murders serve as a sobering reminder of how fragile family bonds can be, and how the effects of violence ripple far beyond a single home, leaving lasting scars on an entire community.